Perchance to Dream is another episode consisting of an in-depth character study of our titular protagonist. Oftentimes, we as an audience get caught up in all the bells and whistles and the nuanced psychology of the various supervillains that we sometimes lose sight of the fact that Batman is a fascinating character in his own right. Perchance to Dream is similar to Dreams in Darkness in this respect while focusing on a very different facet of Batman's psychology, the man under the cape and cowl. Batman is always intensely focused on the task at hand, which usually involves solving a crime, catching a killer or a supervillain. In other words, he's always in high-stress situations where he has to keep his cool and put aside his own personal feelings and desires to get the job done. For this reason, it's a wonderful concept to turn this classic trope on its head by forcing Bruce Wayne into a situation where he finally has everything he wants, but that in itself is the problem because nothing he's experiencing is real. The episode begins with a cool Batmobile car chase sequence against a few generic thugs that leads Batman into a trap, yet he miraculously wakes up in his own bed the following morning. The opening goes a long way to keeping the audience off balance and trying to figure out just what is going on. And that's even before the big reveal that Bruce's parents are alive, and the even bigger reveal that Batman still exists in this strange reality. The opening also gives credence to the idea that Bruce Wayne made up a double life where he was Batman, because there's no reason to think that some underlying supervillain plot is responsible until the gripping final act. Since we have Bruce trapped in his perfect world, we get a very literal presentation of the things missing from his life as Gotham's Caped Crusader. The first is obviously his parents, but the writing in this episode is very smart to run with the premise and thoughtfully consider aspects of his perfect reality that are still possibilities in the real world. For instance, in his perfect world, Bruce is marrying Selina Kyle, the woman of his dreams. Even though normal circumstances dictate that Bruce and Selina can't be together, Bruce could still find happiness through the love of a woman, yet he chooses not to because his work is too important, as Batman himself says in the JLU episode, This Little Piggy. I also appreciate that this ties in with Mask of the Phantasm, which directly addresses why the DC animated universe version of Batman has put aside romantic relationships in the almost obsessive pursuit of justice. Coincidentally, in This Little Piggy, Batman shows he's at least a little self-aware of his obsessive tendencies by calling himself a rich kid with issues. Lots of issues. Getting back to Perchance to Dream, is also possible for Bruce to let someone else take up the mantle of Batman, but again he chooses to bear the responsibility almost solely because he is the only one with the skills and expertise to deal with the extreme crime and decadence Gotham City continually produces. Some argue that Batman himself is responsible for the presence of supervillains in Gotham, but that's a whole other can of worms that we'll have plenty of time to explore in the episode Trial. You know, if it doesn't take me 10 years to get there. What makes Bruce a hero is that he can't in good conscience sit back and let the innocent suffer when he has the power to help them, something he shares in common with Spider-Man. That's why this perfect dream world still has Batman, so Bruce doesn't have to live with the enormous responsibility that he has placed on himself. What I love most about this episode is that it keeps building on the strangeness of Bruce's predicament to the point where the viewer seriously has to question whether or not he's lost his mind. The stakes keep getting higher until there is only one more thing that can top the sheer craziness of this dream world: Bruce Wayne versus Batman. Besides being an awesome image, this fight can be thought about on multiple levels. I personally view this fight in the context of this particular story as a physical representation of the idea that the very action of being Batman can consume a person's life with madness, and that only Bruce Wayne can take up the mantle of Batman because he has one foot firmly planted in the cold, objective truth. This is why he's willing to jump off the bell tower at the end, to free himself from the perfect world he so desperately wants, purely on the basis that it's a lie. It doesn't matter to him that he'd probably be happier there if he bought into it. Using the Mad Hatter as the supervillain for this piece is absolutely perfect in that he has a similar modus operandi to Scarecrow, i.e. mind control, that allows an in-depth exploration of Batman's psyche while simultaneously having a different enough motif that serves to tell a story that's not making the same exact point as Dreams in Darkness. Using a character that has any sort of relation to Alice in Wonderland is extremely appropriate because despite the strange insanity Alice encounters there, Wonderland lives up to its name, being a place full of magic and fantasies that you'd enjoy getting lost in. Bruce doesn't want to leave his own Wonderland, and judging from how pissed off Batman is when he breaks out of the Dream Machine, it deeply hurt him to be forced into that situation, which puts Batman in a more human and relatable context than he is usually allowed. As much as I love the climax, I slightly question how Bruce was able to conjure up the Mad Hatter in his dream. Dream Mad Hatter basically explains exactly what's going on, but he also tells Bruce that he is a figment of Bruce's imagination, which doesn't entirely make sense because I'm not sure how his subconscious was able to piece together his predicament. Sure, the subconscious works on intuition, and Bruce directly addresses this by saying that he can't explain it, but he can feel that Dream Batman holds the answers. I just would have bought this more if there were some subtle clues pointing to the Mad Hatter just before Batman falls into the trap at the beginning. Despite my gripes, this doesn't really bother me because there's a certain dream logic and Twilight Zone quality to the episode in general, and especially at the end, that really fits with the premise. The story is one of the most competent in the entire series, and I can definitely see why this is such a fan-favorite episode. Yet I find that I personally don't go back to this one all that often. In this most recent viewing, I'd say the reason for that is the episode loses momentum about midway through, picking up again just before the final act. But I couldn't think of anything to cut as I was analyzing the story structure, so I'm chalking it up to personal taste. As a character study of Bruce Wayne, the story works perfectly, and that's ultimately the most important thing to get right, making it one of the most thoughtful character pieces Batman the Animated Series ever did. With episodes like Two-Face and Beware the Grey Ghost, that's saying a lot. Moving on to visuals, Perchance to Dream is well animated for the most part, just a few stiff movements here and there. What this episode really has going for it in the art direction is an incredible ambience. I don't mean to put so much emphasis on the climax because the whole episode is really good, but the fight at the bell tower really kicks the show's stylized aesthetic into overdrive. The heavy rain and gothic architecture is worthy of the level of drama the story has been building up to. Eric Radomski, who worked as a background designer and producer on the show, should be very proud of the glorious renderings of the cemetery and cathedral. This sequence wouldn't be nearly as effective without the proper visual elements. There is a shot of Batman when he shows up to confront Bruce at the bell tower that's a very simplistic silhouette, with a dramatic flash of lightning in the background, yet it looks very warped and dreamlike, which goes a long way towards emphasizing the off-kilter nature of this final confrontation. It's also possible that the silhouette was just poorly drawn, but I think it looks so awesome that I'm going to choose to interpret it as the former. Of course, the ambience wouldn't be complete without the magnificent score this series always has, but this time it was turned up to 11. Throughout the episode, the music builds on that weird tension that's very appropriate for a more cerebral episode, while going really big in the final action sequence. I love how the Mad Hatter's theme is brought back and used to foreshadow his eventual appearance if you pay attention. The voice cast continues their stellar work, and I believe this episode marks the first time Kevin Conroy had to act against himself, seeing as how Bruce Wayne and Batman have a conversation before they duke it out. He gets the chance to do this again in the Justice League episode of Better World, which, by the way, was awesome, and the JLU episode, The Once and Future Thing, where old Bruce Wayne from Batman Beyond interacts with his younger self. Conroy very effectively inflects his voice so that there's more of a distinction between Bruce Wayne and Batman, and in this particular episode he gets to vocally explore more of the character's humanity, such as when Bruce talks to Leslie Tompkins about his fear that he's losing his mind, and when he freaks out after discovering that he can't read anything because all the text is jumbled. Possibly the best line, and the best delivered one in this episode, is when Mad Hatter asks Bruce if he's wrong about being trapped in a dream world just as he's about to jump off the cathedral, and Bruce responds with, "Then I'll see you in your nightmares." The audience this time around is treated to 3 recurring guest stars as Adrienne Barbeau, Diana Mulder, and Roddy McDowall deliver fantastic performances as Selina Kyle, Leslie Tompkins, and the Mad Hatter respectively. Roddy McDowall in particular went all out and made his relatively small amount of screen time memorable, especially when he rants at Batman after he breaks out of the dream. Perchance to Dream is one of those rare episodes that demonstrates the psychological complexity of Bruce Wayne and his unshakable focus on the things that are truly important, even at his own cost. In many ways, I think this was the caliber of episode that The Forgotten was aiming for because it too explores Bruce outside of his Batman persona, but Perchance to Dream knocks it out of the park with a more focused script and a really cool premise. I rate it a 4.5 out of 5. Before I close out, I have to express my gratitude to all my subscribers for the continued and seemingly increasing support for the channel, even as new content is extremely sparse lately. It's difficult to believe that the subscriber count has gone up to 1,375 since the review of Eternal Youth, and I just couldn't be any happier with that. As always, I'll do my best to get more of these out, and I'll never stop making them as long as there are more episodes left. But at the moment, it's taking me longer than I'd like to find the time to produce these reviews, so I hope my viewers will forgive my current slow pace. Our next episode is certainly a unique one, so I hope you'll join me once again as I talk about the Cape and Cowl Conspiracy. Until then, signing off.